Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with.
Hey everybody, I'm Cody Pondsmith, lead designer on the Witcher TRPG.
Excellent. And today we're going to talk about the Witcher's Journal, which is pretty much their version of the Monster Manual. Am I correct?
It is the monster manual for the Witcher TRPG, as well as adding a bunch of new exciting lore.
So, yes, I thought this would be a great time to talk about the book because season 3 of the Witcher Netflix series is coming out this week. This is not a new book. This came out maybe a few years ago. This is probably, I would say, maybe your first or second source book from the Witcher RPG. Do you recall the creation process behind it?
Yeah, Witcher's Journal was our first really major supplement for Witcher TRPG. The first was technically Lords and Lands, which is a GM screen, but this is the first like book product. We knew we had to do a bestiary because it's Witcher, you need monsters. Um, and a lot of the process was really bound up in deciding what monsters we were going to put in. We kind of wanted to go quality over quantity, so we wanted to give you a smaller number of monsters but with a lot of detail and kind of input on how you could properly use them. So it was this process of kind of like going, okay, we need to have monsters from every monster type, and we need to have like this many, and kind of figuring out and tailoring in where we wanted them, while also um, building the kind of overarching narrative of the book. We try as much as possible to keep like an internal narrative for all of the Witcher supplements. So in Witcher's Journal's case, it was this deep dive into the world of Witchers, told from the perspective of Erland of Larvik, who was the founder of the Griffin School of Witchers. So it was the weird combination of very hard system development, where we would say like, okay, we have 25 monsters and we need to stat them all out. We need to spend hours watching gameplay and going through references to the books and all this stuff to make them try to feel as much like they feel in the video games and the books. And kind of like figuring out how we could weave this like narrative through the whole book.
I really love the unique take the company did with creating this collection of monsters, because you could have easily and some books have done this, where it's just a picture of the monster, stats, and that's it. Goes on to the next one. It tries to fill in as much monsters as they can. But this is what I really like about this book is that it's a bunch of mini stories in a way of based on the collection of this particular Witcher. This is for each monster entry. There's usually a story beforehand of how they dealt with the creature and everything. Could you talk a little bit about that? Like, what made you go in that direction for this book?
Um, in general, to maintain is that while not everything in the world of The Witcher is about monsters, monsters are a massively important thing in the world, and the world itself is not so straightforward. So we wanted as much as possible to bring that same level of sort of detail to the monsters themselves. So, we in the stat block, we could probably do the stat blocks on one page, but we want to give big art. We want to give that, common superstition, which is, the thing that the everyday peasant knows about the monster. And that's actually always designed to be 50% accurate information and 50% completely false. So you have to sift through, like, what does a peasant know about a dragon? What's accurate? What isn't? And then you have the sort of Witcher lore and the knowledge about the monster that is concrete. Um, so you have that dichotomy of like the peasants who are dealing with the monster in much more of like a mystical, they don't understand it, they've heard some folk tales about it, and then the Witcher who's dealing with it in a very much more, the same way you or I would deal with like a lion. The lion is not mystical. We understand the lion. if someone didn't understand the lion, it might be mystical, but we understand. Um, but then the stories, which are all told sort of from Erland of Larvik's perspective as he is going through his journey of being a Witcher, were kind of there to give both sort of the narrative through line of this being Erland's journal, but also to give context. Because oftentimes you get a bestiary and it gives you a lot of monsters, but it doesn't always give you a really solid idea of how to use those monsters or like how to play them even. Like I can tell you, for instance, that like, I don't know, you're going to encounter a grave hag in a graveyard and they like digging up corpses. But that's not going to be as descriptive as if I show you a story of someone dealing with a grave hag. So the goal was to show these little sort of vignettes of Erland hunting these different monsters to really show like this is this is what's happening. This is sort of the feeling both of encountering that monster and then also of being a witcher, because you know a lot of those stories are told from Erland's perspective with this sort of underpinning of like this is kind of what it's like to be a witcher in these different circumstances from a perspective other than Geralt of Rivia. So we wanted to kind of bring another viewpoint to it as well, especially since Erland had such a different viewpoint on being a Witcher than Geralt or many of the other characters we see in the Witcher novels and video games.
Just to be clear, and I think I sort of mentioned this in the beginning. So this Witcher book, this collection of monsters, is based mostly, maybe all of it, than on the video game version of The Witcher. You know, it's funny how the Witcher is becoming such a big thing, but has like three sources of interpretation. You know, you have the novels, you have the video games, and now we have the Netflix series, which are taking a very different route with the stories. Was it difficult converting the the I guess you could say the monsters you saw or played against in the video games to the book version, to a pen and paper version?
Um, it all kind of depended on the monster. You know, there were some monsters that were pretty easy to translate across. You know, things like wyverns were very simple to transfer. Things like Endrega, you know, some of those monsters that are a little more straightforward. But there were definitely some, and that generally fell into one of two categories, which was um, what I've called reskin monsters or recolor monsters. You know, understandably, because there's only so much assets, there are a number of monsters in Witcher that are they work fundamentally the same as a different monster, but they have a different name and design. Like, you know, griffins and cockatrices and basilisks in the video games all work pretty similarly. Um, so there was a certain amount of challenge to like, okay, we already wrote a griffin, and a cockatrice is not that much different from a griffin. So how are we going to make this a unique fight? You know, how is this not just going to be me fighting a griffin again? Um, and in that case, we always tried to dive into like what the lore of the thing is, what the feel of the thing is. So, for instance, with cockatrice, there's a lot of concept of these like razor sharp feathers and venom and that sort of thing. So we leaned into that and said like, okay, it's like a griffin, but it's not quite as big. It doesn't necessarily hit quite as hard, but it's got these like, you know, razor feathers that cause, you know, horrible bleeding and it's poisonous. And that's how we're going to make it different. And then on the other side, you had monsters that were kind of hard to write because they were in the video games intended to be single monster boss fights. So this is things like the Leshen and even more complicated when you get into like story mission stuff like the Lubberkin and the Botchling, where those were designed to be like single monster encounters in the video game that were very much video game boss fights. So I had to find some way to translate that video game boss fight into a TRPG, which was always a little bit tricky, especially since the TRPG gives you an option that you basically never have in Witcher, which is strength of numbers. What you find early on is that in most RPGs, the more people you have, the easier a fight is going to be. So I've had, we had moments in playtest where he threw out a really powerful monster that was going to be super powerful, and it was, based on the video games and how that interacted. And then we realized this monster is really powerful, and it's got these massive claws that can do all this damage, and it can summon wolves and all this stuff, but it still only gets one turn per round. And if there's 6 people fighting it, then that's going to be a problem. So it was a little tricky to kind of work out how to translate those single player boss fights into monsters you could encounter in the game and still have a similar experience while not breaking the internal canon and the narrative, because we don't want to say okay, well, Aleshin on its own has a problem with 6 players, so whenever your players of a party size of that size encounter Aleshin, you encounter 4 Aleshins, because I can't think of a reason that you would encounter 4 Aleshins. So it was a weird balance.
You brought up an interesting point. So this book has been out for some time. Is there any advice you would kind of let game masters know when it comes to using these monsters particularly? Is there anything that you've learned through the years that you feel like game masters should learn?
I think the biggest thing is to remember that Witcher works inherently differently from Dungeons and Dragons or a lot of other, high fantasy or fantasy settings. And remember that the monster is the climax of an adventure. Witcher does not work really well if it's you go to a place and there's a bunch of monsters and you fight through those monsters, and then you get to another place and there's a bunch of monsters and you fight through those monsters, because that's not really how it's designed. And in the same way, big arena boss fights, like you might find with the classic, you've gone into a dragon's cave and there's the dragon and there's you and it's a big open space, fight, don't work super well, once again, because that's not really how Witcher is often designed, except, in some places a video game, because it's a video game. So what I would generally suggest is, for any Witcher game, for any Witcher session or concept, you want to build the game around the monster, but you want to build the game around the monster to have the monsters that sort of big thing at the end, and then maybe weave some other monsters in there. So you want to build sort of, in many cases, like a mystery around it. So, for instance, in the core book of Witcher, we have To All a Good Night, which is the example mission. And To All a Good Night has a rock troll. And a battle against a rock troll is going to be pretty interesting, but depending on how it goes, it's maybe not going to go super long. So the way we go around that is basically you get in and there's a mystery. Children are being taken, parents are being murdered, nobody knows what's happening. So the first part of this game is investigating what's happening to the children, who's killing the parents. You go to these places and you find what's going on, and the buildings are being smashed into, and the parents are just being beaten to death by something. And then we get a little action because you go into another building where the child was recently taken, and you find tracks, and you're like, oh my god, we found tracks. So you follow those tracks and you get out there and you find out that there's this group of neckers that effectively you're scavenging in this sort of little hut outside the city. And you have to fight the Neckers. You stumbled into sort of a Necker ambush almost, so there's a bit of a fight there. But Neckers aren't super powerful, so you should be generally all right. Um, but then you realize like none of these Neckers are going to be beating a full-grown adult to death. Like that's not even how they operate. So you investigate further, and you eventually can find this cave, and you find in the cave all this, living stuff, but obviously not of a human. And then the troll comes back, and you have the option of fighting the troll, or you can talk to the troll. Because another big thing of Witcher is it's not always about killing. Sometimes you can talk your way out of situations. Many times the situation is not what you expected. And in To All a Good Night, for spoilers, the troll has been tricked. It's being told by an occupying Nilfgaardian force in the city who's trying to keep control. Okay, you are supposed to go out and find these children that I say you should find because they're bad children, and you need to bring them to me so that I can punish them or whatever. And if anybody gets in your way, kill them. So this troll thinks it's doing a wonderful thing by going out and finding all the naughty children and bringing them to this Nilfgaardian lord who is using the children as hostages functionally. But the troll just thinks he's doing a good thing, and so you have that conflict of like, okay, now where do you go? Are you gonna, if you kill the troll, you will technically solve the problem, but you don't really solve the problem. Do you confront the lord who's paying off the troll? Do you tell the townsfolk? Like, where do you go from there? So the monster is important, but it's not just like a fight your way to the monster and then fight the monster. It's a mystery surrounding it. It's a build up to it, and the story is not inherently what you think it is from the beginning.
Hmm. If I may ask, being that this book's been out for some time,
Yeah.
what's been your favorite monster or monsters that you like to use for your adventures?
Let's see. See, that's tricky because it often kind of depends on what the game is intended for, or what type of game I'm running. I have a I have like a go-to, which I was very happy to get into the book, which is the Vendigo, which is mentioned in Witcher 3 in like one sentence. Um, and it's a fun encounter because it's a very powerful monster, but it's entirely an ambush predator, and it doesn't prefer to just attack people outright. It has this sort of modus operandi where it will stalk you. It lives on mountains, big snowy mountains. It will stalk people through these mountains with a very high stealth base, kind of like lurking in the trees. It's this big spindly thing, with like gaunt form and gray skin and antlers. Um, and it will if it makes eye contact with somebody, it can put a curse on them, which puts this like supernatural hunger on them, which drives them to just like need to feast on at first meat, and then fresh meat, and then eventually someone of their own species. Once again, trying to pull from the mythos of the Wendigo from Algonquin lore to kind of build something that made sense in Witcher. But once you are fully taken over by this curse, you become a thrall to the Vendigo, and the only way to break that is to get you off the mountain and then try to break the curse. So the Vendigo creates a fight that is not exactly a fight. It is you having to kind of watch your back as you're traveling through this really harsh winter terrain, and you will sometimes like see this thing lurking out just outside the light of your fire because it's afraid of fire. Um, and it's not going to come right for you. It's going to try to put this curse on you and then stalk you until you break. Um, and if one of your party members or like an NPC who's traveling with you gets hit by this curse, you are now in this situation where like you either need to get off this mountain before they fully succumb to the curse, or you need to find the Vendigo and kill it before they succumb to the curse. So it's a fun, like, non-linear monster interaction.
So again, this book came out some time ago, and since then they've released like various other source books, including a very fantastic magic source book, which we talked about beforehand. Um, so what is next for The Witcher? Is there possibly a Witcher's Journal 2 that might come out? What's
We are currently working with CDPR, so I can't really say much. As I'm sure most people know, CDPR is working on another Witcher game, and there are a lot of things that we kind of need to work together on because aspects of that game are definitely going to affect our future plans for the Witcher TRPG. We do have further plans for the Witcher franchise, but I am not in a place where I can really talk about what they are. I can say down the road I would love to do a Witcher's Journal Volume 2, um, but I can't say exactly what we're working on at the moment because I don't know, but our business manager would probably kill me.
Well, excellent. Well, viewers, again, this is out right now at your local gaming store, as well as PDFs available on the R Talsorian website, and I believe on Drive to RPG. Am I
Yep.
correct? So yes, I have one last question for you.
All right.
What is the scariest monster to you?
Oh, the scariest monster to me. That's tricky. I think for me personally, it's probably the Heim, just because their demons in Witcher are super weird because they're like pretty unknown. And the idea of this thing that just like latches onto you and uses your own mind against you and like hides in the shadows and nobody else can see it is really, really creepy.
Well, that's it. Well, Cody, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this fantastic book. Again, local gaming stores, Drive to RPG, and our Talsorian website. You should really check this book out. It's a fantastic read. Even if you're not collecting or even playing the Witcher RPG, just the lore, just to read it. That's what I enjoy most. I mean, there's so many of these monsters I have not used or I have not played against. But I just love rereading some of the stories put together here, especially the Witcher that's going through these challenges and writing about them is talking about it. And they're fantastic. So yes, thank you so much, and viewers, be safe out there. We'll see you next time. Take care.